Well, one of the closely watched races in the Michigan House is the 62nd District here in Battle Creek. Jim Haadsma is the Democrat who will take on the incumbent, Dr. John Bizon, in just a few weeks. And Jim is here this morning to talk to us a little bit this half hour. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Richard. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate the time. It's been a while since we've talked. Let's maybe start at a point where we might have stepped last time, which was what motivates you here?
What motivates me principally is the fact that this isn't the Michigan in which I grew up. I grew up in a Michigan in which more voices were heard, and I think that there was more fundamental fairness. And what I've sensed over the last 5.5 years under one-party rule is that there is just not enough other voice opportunity. And what's motivating me is to ensure that in the Democratic-controlled state House, which I hope to be a part of after January 1, 2017, we'll have an opportunity to provide some different voices besides the Republican-controlled Senate and the Republican-controlled Supreme Court and Governor Snyder.
What's the number one issue that you see facing the state right now?
I think it's prioritization of the budget, Richard. I think that what we need to do is ensure that the budget is shaped in a way, the tool of the budget is used so that we can make sure that K-12 education is prioritized. That's the number one thing. University education, college education, I think, is a second priority. Infrastructure as well. So use the budget properly to shape those priorities would be what I would like to do in Lansing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned infrastructure. Is that Flint water based in that thinking or broader than that?
Well, it's broader than that. It's even in Calhoun County, in places like Burlington Township, we have bridges infrastructure that are problematic. But the Flint water crisis is just what's happened most prominently in the news. It could happen in other cities. Water infrastructure is a very significant issue, but roads and bridges are too a significant issue that have to be addressed, that have to be prioritized to ensure that we don't have another Flint water crisis.
Is there an area now here or statewide that is not getting attention at all that you think should be?
Here in Battle Creek, here in Calhoun County?
Sure, or across the state, or both.
Well, K-12 education is getting a lot of attention. We see that from the news reports just this week in terms of the test batteries results and the watch over certain schools. But the attention that I think ought to be directed is more monies prioritized to K-12 education, more support provided for families of children, more support provided children in the schools to ensure success to go on to college or go on to skilled trades.
We'll go further into that thought in just a second on WBCK. We're here with Jim Haadsma, candidate for 62nd District House, a Democrat. We've been talking about a number of things broadly, but let's zoom in on the school issue if we can for a second. Battle Creek Public Schools in the news big time as of late with what appears to be a free fall in enrollment, at least certainly a decline, and some corrective measures that are being taken to try and sort that out. This is on the radar at this point. Apparently, if you hear from Dr. Bizon at all, that the Treasury's watching this situation, and certainly a lot of others are too. What's your thought on this? And we can certainly talk about it locally, but from the state viewpoint, we have some critical problems. Detroit, of course, in the mix too. Schools are in trouble in some places. What should we do about that?
Well, they're in trouble in places even in this district.
Yeah.
Albion Public Schools, of course, is now part of the Marshall Public Schools District. I've knocked thousands of doors across the district this cycle. I've knocked doors in the Battle Creek District, of course, and in the Albion District several weeks. I think that what's happened in Albion is very disappointing from a community perspective. I'm hopeful that Marshall and Albion can work together to ensure the best education of the students. But when you take a school out of a community and you go into a community and you see Homer Pride and Springport schools and yard signs for neighboring districts in Albion, it does gut the community. What I've sensed walking about is in places like Urbandale, where Schools of Choice has allowed people to send their kids to the opposite side of our city, Harper Creek, for example, and Lamora Park is now K through 2. Neighborhoods just aren't going to be the same if we don't strengthen our school districts. If Dudley's in trouble, and I know Dudley's on the watch list, that's going to be problematic for Precinct 21, the northwest side of Battle Creek. So I want to do all I can, again, to ensure that we use our budget on a state perspective to help schools and ensure that schools don't fail, and ensure that we have schools that are working together to ensure the best education of our students.
How do we do that? And secondarily, is closing school buildings when you're in an emergency situation the best option?
I think that sometimes it's the only option. That's happened in Battle Creek Public Schools the last couple of end-of-year academic years. I think that when you're facing a decline in enrollment, you have to try different things, as they are trying with new alignments to the school buildings. And the educators, the administrators, the parents all have to think differently. They all have to try something new to ensure that it works. I think ultimately what we may face in some of our community schools is probably a greater effort at collectivization, a greater effort at doing things together. I think CISD, Calhoun Intermediate School District, would play a significant role in connection with that, Richard.
Interesting. Well, it has been criticized widely, the notion of closing buildings. Dr. Joe Schwartz with a scathing opinion in the Battle Creek Inquirer recently about closed school buildings, and even went so far as to say this district is going to be realigned or closed as it progresses right now on this path. I just don't know what the alternative is at this point when you're in this kind of a situation, and how is Lansing going to change that district by district?
I think it is, back to your premise, stunning. When we are in a community in which back on May 5 in the Lakeview District, we passed a bond issue to expand elementaries and to improve elementary schools, while at the same time in the Battle Creek Public Schools, other schools like Fremont were closed. It really presents a jarring picture of a juxtaposition that doesn't make sense. I think it's a policy that follows from the Schools of Choice legislation from 20 years time ago. I don't pretend to believe that in a narrow House majority we're going to change all that's happened in educational policy K-12. But we can ensure that we don't have any more radical policies with schools being closed and parents being required to ferry their kids across town very inconveniently to parents. Back to Albion a minute, knocking on doors in Albion and finding out that kids are going to have to be on buses in extraordinarily early hours. Not as early as you have to get up to come to work here, but almost to get over to Marshall. And we have to make sure we are prioritizing K-12 schools so that kids aren't bearing the brunt of poor budgetary choices at the state level.
Yeah, the Schools of Choice idea at the time was billed as one in which a competitive landscape would eventuate. That is to say, those successful schools would thrive and those that were not would not, and the cream would rise to the top, as they say. Has that not happened here?
I think it has happened here. It certainly has happened in Albion. If here means Battle Creek, I think it's happening here. All one has to do is knock doors in different districts and find where kids are going to school. And you can go to Verona and find consistently that many times kids aren't going to Verona, but parents or grandparents are taking time out There aren't buses picking these kids up. They're taking time out, perhaps not working as many hours as they otherwise could have, but they're taking time out to bring their kids to another part of the city. I think it has happened here. I think that Superintendent Parker is to be given great effort for trying to stem that tide by trying some innovative, different kinds of things with the buildings in the Battle Creek Public Schools. But it is alarming. All one has to do is go to the northwest side, northeast side of Battle Creek and find where some of the kids are going to school when you ask the parents. And the reason we're passing bond issues in Lakeview to enlarge schools is because they're coming to the other side of town, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense from the perspective of family planning in terms of how family schedules are made up on a school day.
Yeah, we presume, though, that in individual families, when that thinking has gone on, the choice has been made. We have to move to a different district regardless of the commute time and the schedule effects. Is that what you've learned?
Yes, that's their perception. I think that many times, instead of working with the existing district and the existing educators and the existing administrators, it's often easy to try something new. And I think that becomes very complicated for the family and certainly becomes very erosive of the community in which the schools are attended or were attended before the exodus. And
on that basis, I presume that you would feel, correct me if I'm wrong, that districts that are failing, not the cream that has risen to the top, should just fail. If that's the case, then the community erodes.
Yes, I think that what's happened in Albion is an example of that. When I've knocked doors in Albion this spring and summer, I have certainly sensed a flagging of community spirit because of the elimination of the Wildcats and because they're now part of Marshall. So I, without question, would like to have the state buttress these schools as well as we might with the budget, good decisions we could make to ensure that, in fact, we're supporting these schools rather than threatening them with very poor choices for often kids left behind only on the table.
County Commissioner Jim Haadsma is here, wants to be your state representative. We'll take a short break and have a few more minutes with him coming up on WBCK. A few more minutes with Jim Haadsma. You said you've been knocking on doors. What have people been saying to you about what concerns them?
Well, I've knocked on thousands of doors since we started the walking program back in April. People are concerned about the economy. People are concerned about educational issues. People are concerned about how municipalities get funding from the state of Michigan. In other words, we want to make sure that revenue sharing is appropriately distributed and that our roads are always an issue, especially when you get outside Battle Creek, which has better roads than out county, and other infrastructure issues. They're concerned about that as well. So I get a lot of questions about top of the ticket. Lots of people, because of the evisceration of local media, don't know that much about local races, and they talk quite candidly a lot about top of the ticket and how they see the country going. And interestingly, they talk about the U.S. Supreme Court depending upon how the top of the ticket goes. I think that may be led by Judge Scalia's death in February and the perception of many voters that the U.S. President seat is very important in context of the U.S. Supreme Court appointments.
What do you make of the climate about this election season and the top of the ticket to which you refer? There was a poll yesterday that said what motivates supporters on either side here is a fear of the other side and not necessarily the candidate themselves. This is a tremendous statement, I suppose.
I think compared to when I was a young man, say 30 or 35 years ago, and I'm talking in my mid-20s and early 20s, we have a much more polarized political environment. I don't know why that's driven in that direction, but I think, for example, on the Calhoun County Board, we've gotten along very well in past years, Republican and Democrat candidate. And I think if people just sometimes get past their anxieties concerning the badness of the other candidate and listen carefully, even if it's not what they're accustomed to hearing, they can see that there's a lot more common denominator that brings us together than shoves us apart as Americans.
If we can just get through the noise.
I think the election season is very noiseful for lots of people. Lots of people have already told me in August they are very anxious to have it over. I think that there are often people who watch television a lot and get a lot of television ads. They're not anxious to get it over because people are knocking on their doors.
Got it.
I think an important issue that has evolved in the past 6-8 weeks is that about the straight party voting ballot court decision making. And of course, yesterday there was a decision from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati which does allow that option to continue to exist. That's really important, I think, because I have been in places like the old Washington School when there have been long lines and problems at the polls. And I think the fact that we will have a straight party voting option, it doesn't compel anybody to do that, but an option is probably going to be helpful in this year's election. The rest of that court action will have to come about subsequently, but at least for November, I'm confident the clerks across the state are very relieved that we will still have that option this year.
Certainly a little jittery, not knowing which way it was going to go there for clerks and others who might be trying to sort things out here in the 11th hour. Time is fleeting, but I want to give you a chance to answer this question. The city commissioners in Battle Creek on Tuesday are going to presumably vote on a panhandling ordinance. Now, associated with that is a number of things. The notion that some people aren't meeting their needs. They're on the street asking for help. There's all sorts of associated feelings with that. But the point remains that there are some people who are not able to make ends meet. Is there some perspective you can have as a state representative to try and address that issue?
Richard, first, the fact that we have things I've never seen in my lifetime until the last 10 or 15 years, proliferation of payday advance places, proliferation of rent-to-own places, proliferation of rent-to-own car places, demonstrates that lots of people don't have as much as I think was more equitably distributed, say, 30 or 35 years ago. In terms of the panhandling ordinance, I've reviewed it. I think it may have some vagueness associated with it and therefore might in fact be assailed by some group or another. But without question, I think that panhandling is an epidemic that plagues the community. I've been wishful that we could write a very tailored ordinance, perhaps even on a county level. I approached our former county corporation council about exploring this because I think it affects tourism, it affects economic vitality, it affects the community feel of a place like Battle Creek. I don't want my kids to be in a place that I never saw when I grew up, where there are people with cardboard signs at East Dickman and Southwest Capitol asking for money. I think, and I'm a Haven board member, I think that money should be better spent to assuage your conscience by giving a donation to the Haven or Charitable Union or the Share Center, and don't feed habits associated with cigarettes or booze or heroin.
All right. We appreciate the time you've given us, Jim. I'm sure we'll be seeing you again soon.
I appreciate you having me, and I look forward to it. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Commissioner Jim Haadsma, candidate for 62nd District House Representative in Battle Creek.